Welcome to the Core Women Podcast, the place for women entrepreneurs, authors, and self-starters looking to build community and gain valuable insights through expert interviews with women at the top of their game. Join your host, podcaster, producer, expert coach, entrepreneur, and author, Dr. Summer Watson, as she aims to inspire and empower you through these candid conversations. Lean in and embrace the journey. It's time to start the show. Here's your host, Dr. Summer Watson.
Welcome to the Core Women Podcast, where we spotlight the voices of women shaping leadership through heart, wisdom, and humanity. I'm your host, Dr. Summer Watson, and today I'm joined by Dr. Jacqueline Kumar, who is a philosopher, writer, program developer, and expert in applied relational intelligence. Jacqueline is defining what empathy really means, not as a personality trait, but as a skill that can be learned, practiced, and refined. With a background in moral psychology and the philosophy of emotions, she created a powerful 3-stage empathy process that helps people lead, connect, and communicate with more clarity and integrity. In this episode, we dive into how empathy gets misunderstood, what to do when it becomes overextended, and how to turn emotional insight into ethical action. Let's get started. Welcome, Dr. Kumar.
Thank you so much, Summer. It's such a pleasure to be here.
I'm excited about our conversation, but before we dig into your past and into your professional history, if you could describe your life to this point in one word, what would that word be and why?
Ooh, that's a good question. I would have to say resilience.
Resilience. Okay, tell us more.
Well, from a very young age, my biological mother left when I was just 3 months old, and she struggled with multiple mental health issues. So as a result of that, she would come in and out of my life like the weather. So as I grew up, I experienced a lot of emotional unpredictability. And so I learned early on how to manage situations and keep things moving forward. So I became the kind of person who tried to keep everyone else happy or overextend myself by overgiving. And I always tried to fix things. And that wasn't something that I chose necessarily. It was just how I learned to cope.
Yeah.
And so as I got older, I noticed that I handled hard things the same way every time. So when something difficult would happen to me, I would feel the emotion, but only for a brief moment. And then I would quickly go into problem-solving mode. I would say to myself, okay, Jacqueline, what's next? How do we solve this problem? And, on the outside, people would view that as strength. And in many ways, it was. But it also meant that I did not always allow myself the space to really feel the emotions that were coming up for me at the time. And so I was very good at compartmentalizing and putting my feelings in a box, storing it away, just so that I would be able to push forward. And I never really took the time to slow down and check in with myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so over time, I realized that life wasn't happening to me, but it was happening for me. And it was all about being able to shift my perspective. But I have to share that a real turning point for me came during a conference on empathy, where I had the opportunity to listen to Dr. James Doty. So he was a neurosurgeon, and his talk focused on how important it is about the stories that we tell ourselves. This is what really matters. And he said, the brain cannot distinguish between truth and untruth. So when we tell ourselves, I'm not good enough, or when we tell ourselves, I can't do this, what happens? The brain actually believes us, and that belief starts to shape our reality. And I remember sitting there thinking, wow, this was my aha moment, right? Because learning to change that inner dialogue was so important. It was how I was going to be able to realize how the way that I spoke to myself was going to shape how I showed up for other people. And so after Dr. Doty's talk, I wanted to understand things more deeply. So I wanted to understand why empathy could be such a gift on the one hand, but then feel so heavy at other times, right? So we really started to question how empathy worked, how it could be misunderstood, and how it's valuable in our relationships and moral decisions.
Absolutely. So I'm going to take a step back here for a moment because that picture you gave us as you grew up, what was happening, how you protected yourself over the years as a child, and how that worked into your early adulthood. And also those stories that Dr. James Doty was talking about and the stories that we believe. What might be some of those other variables or factors that influenced you along your life? Was it an issue that you had to protect yourself innately and organically? That's what you did?
Absolutely.
It was a reaction, right?
Yes.
It was a reaction to what was happening in your life, number one. Number two, it was the stories that were told to you and maybe you believed along the way,
hmm
right? About others, about yourself. Maybe it was your own values that started to develop that shifted or set in your belief system as well. So, do you think it's just stories or other factors that influence the way we behave and think of ourselves as well?
No, I think it's definitely stories, but it's also, our upbringing. It's also our societal influences. But I think essentially for me, regardless of what I've been through in my life and the challenges that I faced, I always found myself to be a very sensitive and empathetic person.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I was always very in tune to other people's emotions, maybe at a higher level than most. And being able to have that ability and that gift, I guess you can call it, I was able to kind of always rise through. So even though at the moment I wasn't saying to myself, oh, Jacqueline, like, the fear would creep in, but I always found a way to persevere and say to myself, no, you know what, Jacqueline, you can do this,
Yeah.
regardless of what is being told to you. And it was always that ongoing battle that I had within myself. But I think I really just always pushed through. I always tried to find light at the end of that dark tunnel, no matter what.
And that's really interesting too, Jacqueline, because when I look at resilience, I think innate and learned. It sounds like you had both.
I had,
That is something that's within you. That's part of your personality. That's part of your makeup. But then you also develop that resilience because of the things that you were exposed to. Maybe things that you learned, maybe a support system, maybe theories from school, maybe your own value set. Like there's a lot of influences there, our own personality. That's more of that innate thing, right?
absolutely.
Like, I am going to overcome this. I am going to get back up, even though I'm feeling a certain way. Did you have those support systems that you could rely on where you could feel safe around them to get back up, to move forward, even though you felt maybe abandoned by your mom as a child?
Yeah, I definitely did. I mean, I had an amazing father. He was definitely my support system. But again, it doesn't kind of replace that void that you get from a motherly love, right? I never
Right.
really had that. But, being able to be supported in the way that my father supported me, and also just being really in tune with my faith with God, that is what pushed me forward. And I always kind of hung on to that no matter what challenge came my way. And I always found, a way to look at the positive of things, even though I grew up in a very negative environment, right? So, my family was amazing, but there were also very negative people. So it
Mm,
took a lot for me to kind of see the positive in that negative atmosphere. And I think that
yeah.
that's so important. I think the number one thing that I always go back to is my faith. I think that is definitely what pushed me through.
Thank you. It sounds like you craved something to really mend some of those things that you had going on inside of you, and to also move forward with that foundation of safety and understanding and spirituality. So let me go to my next question. Your work is grounded in deep philosophy, but it's incredibly practical as well. What personal or academic experiences led you to focus on empathy as a regulated skill rather than an emotional reflex?
Yeah, so just to kind of go back to that question and to my background, I deeply valued my time in academia and the impact that I was having on my students. But I began to feel this pull to do more, right? I felt like, okay, well, I'm a really empathetic person. I really love empathy, but I want to understand how this theory works. So I dedicated half of my life to understanding the concept of empathy. And one of the most important things for me was that I didn't want my work to just remain in theory or in academic spaces. I wanted my work to be something that could be put into practice so that people could use this in their everyday lives. And so that's why it led me to create my three-stage empathy process that I'll go into a little bit deeper later on. But I essentially argue that empathy is not an emotion, it's a process. And I think most of us can be very clear on this, that we have this definition. I call it a very limited definition of empathy, where we say empathy is feeling what the other person is feeling, or we're placing ourselves in the shoes of the other. Summer, that's not wrong, but I just see empathy very differently.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about how you see it differently and your three-stage empathy process. That was my next question. So you segued right into it. Thank you for that.
So going back to that, so I was saying that, most people would define empathy as feeling what the other person is feeling or placing ourselves in the shoes of the other. It's very other regarding. And that's not wrong, but I see empathy very differently. And I define it as not just a feeling, but a repeatable process that involves three co-constitutive stages. And let me break that down because that sounds a little loaded. So this process is what I call the recognize, examine, and shift process.
Okay.
So what that means is that I want to clarify that empathy doesn't start with the other person, it starts with us. So if we're not aware of what's happening inside us first, our empathy can easily become reactive, it can be overextended, and it can become misdirected. And so empathy for me, my very first stage is what I call the self-awareness stage or the recognize stage. And this is all about noticing what's happening inside us before reacting. So whether that's in a relationship, whether that's having a difficult conversation with a colleague, or in a moment of conflict. So at this stage, I usually ask people to kind of reflect and ask themselves some very important questions, such as, what am I feeling right now? And what do I need? What's being triggered here? Is something being triggered from my past that's causing me to react in this way? So we're really trying to be able to really recognize what's showing up for us in this stage. And what I always say is that we can't change what we first don't recognize. And so next is what I talk about is the perspective taking stage or the examine stage. And I want to just go back. I look at empathy from a very self-related concept, right? Because I argue that empathy starts with us first before we can actually overextend it to other people. So the perspective taking stage that I talk about is really getting curious about what's going on, and it replaces self-judgment, right? So instead of criticizing yourself for what you're feeling or for what you're doing, we take a pause and we gather information about our inner experience. Asking questions such as, what is this response trying to tell me? What happened before this reaction? Or what beliefs or fears might be driving it? So at this stage, one can make sense of their reactions without minimizing their needs or invalidating their feelings. And finally, the last stage of my empathy process that I call the action-oriented response or the shift stage. So this is where understanding turns into intentional action. So we're choosing now how to respond in a way that's ethical, that's grounded, and aligned with our values. And whether that means setting a boundary, having a clear conversation, or leading with clarity instead of emotion. And so when empathy is understood in this sense, it becomes something that we can practice, we can apply in every area of our life, in our relationships, in leadership, with teams, and it also helps with personal growth. So instead of draining us or leading to, self-sacrifice, empathy becomes a repeatable tool that actually instills healthier communication, better boundaries, and more sustainable success, I would say.
Well, I love the process. I love that you created a process that resilience and empathy extends beyond our natural strength. As you were explaining this process, one of the things you said in the first part is to recognize. And I
Hmm.
think that's really important is that first step, is that recognition. Because a lot of people either aren't ready to recognize, don't want to recognize, they want to stay habituated into old habits, even if it's not necessarily aligning with their value set. You see it all the
That's
time.
right. That's right.
Well, that's how my parents did it. That's how my grandparents did it. And it's recognition.
Hmm.
So if somebody comes to you and says, Dr. Kumar, I experience this stuff all the time in all of my relationships. I am so empathic, but I feel like I'm being bulldozed over. I'm exhausted, giving so much almost that I'm getting sick. I'm overwhelmed, but I like who I am. What do you say to this person?
We can say that we like who we are, and we do, but there's obviously things that are not working for us, right?
Right,
Obviously, you're feeling drained and you're exhausted because women do this all the time. So we're
right.
naturally empathetic. We're naturally the caregivers. So I see this all the time with women is that they'll come in and they'll say, I want harmony in the workplace and I want everybody to get along. And then they come home and they're exhausted and they're drained and they don't know why. And I say to them, I said, something's got to change. And you have to recognize that, yes, although you want to show empathy, that's great. But are you showing empathy to yourself? Are you putting yourself first?
Hmm.
And, I sit with them and I usually try to figure out what's triggering this, right? So let's try to understand and recognize what's causing this. Is it guilt? Do you feel like, you don't have proper boundaries in place? What's driving this behavior? Once we work through that, they're like, yes. And I said, every day practice, practice putting up a boundary, practice saying it's okay if I don't, overextend myself to, Peter today.
Right.
It's okay for me to take that time and put up these healthy boundaries for myself because I can guarantee you, once we start doing that, we are going to be happier. We are going to live more content lives, and people are going to respect us more because of it.
Absolutely. I love that guidance because you talk about empathy being misplaced or overextended. And for so many, it looks like exactly what you explained: exhaustion, overwhelm, just not feeling great about oneself or the other because of those lack of boundaries.
Hmm.
And a lot of times it starts with recognition, recognizing that you're part of the process,
That's right.
and it is a process. It is not just a natural strength, but it's a process to be empathic in a way that is healthy, in a way that you recognize, examine, and shift. I
Hmm.
love that. So, what are some of the biggest empathy related challenges you see in women leaders and mentors, especially around boundaries and emotional labor?
That's a really good question. I see women more so than anything is burnout.
Mm,
So they tend to really feel burnt out at the end of the day because empathy is kind of working against them, right? Like I said earlier. So it's not really being taught as like a decision-making tool, or it's not really even being taught as something that can prevent burnout if we're overextending ourselves, like we said.
mhm.
So I think it's just a question of being able to pause and reflect and not react in certain situations, right? And being
Yeah.
able to always just kind of pause and say, let me just take some time to figure out what's coming up for me in this moment and being able to react accordingly.
Yeah. And I think part of your process will help people with their response versus their reaction, because a reaction is kind of a knee jerk thing. It's when you go into the doctor and they take that thing that looks like a hammer and they tap it against your knee, and there's that reaction. It's not necessarily a response. A response is something, as you said, it is what triggers us. So it's recognition, what drives us. How can we examine this and how can we shift this? And
Hmm.
that goes along with that response versus a reaction. So it is a practice.
It's practice. Absolutely.
It's practice. It's something that you ask them to do, practice this, and you give tools and you give support in how to go about the practice. I love the process here and what you've come up with, how you help people, how you help individuals, groups, and organizations to work through some of these issues with their workforce. So this is wonderful. We've covered a lot of ground here, Dr. Kumar. As we come to the close of the interview, my last question is, for listeners who feel emotionally drained or unclear about how to use their empathy well, what's one step they can take this week to move towards healthier, more intentional relational practices?
Oh, that's a good question. I would recommend always coming back to awareness and alignment. So pause and ask yourself, does this decision actually reflect my values and the kind of leader or person I want to be? One thing I always say, and I want to leave it at this, I always say, run your own race. It's easy to look around, it's easy to compare yourself to others and feel like you're behind or you're doing something wrong. But no one knows you better than you know yourself. Trust your instincts because your path and your vision does not need to look like anyone else's.
Thank you, Dr. Kumar, for joining me on the Core Women podcast today.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. You can connect with Dr. Jacqueline Kumar on LinkedIn, on Instagram at Empathos Coaching, and at www.empathoscoaching.com.
Thank you for joining us on the Core Women podcast with Dr. Summer Watson. We're so glad you're here and would love to connect more with you. Find us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at Core Women, and on Twitter at Core Women 1. For more about Core Women and Dr. Watson, visit corewomen.com. Want more support and resources for amazing women like you? Great! Join Dr. Watson and Jen Fontanilla at the Life, Love, and Money Collective, a Core Women production that aids in understanding the key traits that might be getting in the way of living a life that you are absolutely passionate about. Connect with Summer and Jen and find out more at thelifeloveandmoney.com.